I'm the kind that got in trouble for telling secrets. They thought I was yelling in their ear, and it's like, no, that's my natural voice.
You're one of the ones that you can't whisper. You don't know.
My dad is the same way. I got a brother that's also a preacher, and I'm told that I have some of the same mannerisms, and he gets a little, he kind of makes his point more in a wedding and a funeral than he does his sermons, but I mean, you can hear him a mile away. You notice I walk around. No. I don't stand still. If you will, please turn to the book of Mark. I don't know how many of you have been here for a long time, or if you came a long time before a long time ago. But a good friend of mine used to preach here, one of my mentors, Brother Johnny Ramsey. And I knew Brother Ramsey since I was 6 years old. He was also one of my teachers in school. And I graduated nearly 25 years ago, so that does you something. One of my closest friends. And the outline that I'm going to give you, some of the points, or some of the points that he gave me and a few other young preachers, including his son-in-law. I grew up in South Texas. I don't know how many of you ever heard of Victoria, Texas, down on the Gulf Coast. That's where I grew up. And he used to hold meetings for us, and I was privileged to hear him and a whole host of other gospel preachers, many of them that have long since gone. My dad being an elder at the old downtown congregation. Now my oldest brother, Tom Jr., is an elder at the Midtown congregation, which used to be the congregation I grew up at. And then I got a brother named Eddie, who preaches, and I don't know how many of you ever heard of Kahoma, Texas, which is near Big Spring. You got to understand, West Texas, when they say near, that could be 100 miles. West Texas is West Texas, so just imagine the oil field and the cotton farms and hot sun. He's in a town called Kahoma. And he kind of gave me a few ideas for what we're going to do this morning as well as Brother Ramsey. But when you look into the book of Mark, you will see some of the attributes that we can take of what Jesus is like. Whereas Matthew, he's dealing more from a historical perspective, so he's dealing with those who read to the Jews, because some people thought heritage alone would save them. That, I'm born in this family, I'm good. And he said, no, that doesn't work. Whereas you look into the book of Luke, dealing more with the Greeks and who they thought intellectualism was the answer. All right, I know more than you, so I'm good. No, he's saying, no, that's not quite the answer. Where the book of John is written universally, but the book of Mark is written to the Romans, and they were noted for their warfare. And some saying that, you know what, I have all this strength, I'm good, I have the answer. And he said, no, you don't. So therefore, when we put all four together to form one picture, a complete picture, it makes Jeremiah 9:23 ring true, where man cannot just rely on their own wisdom, their own strength, or their own heritage. Look at the book of Mark and we see what he was like. How we need to be like him and behave like him, to have the mind of him in Philippians 2:5, to follow in his steps, 1 Peter 2:21, to imitate him, 1 Corinthians 11:1, to have the spirit of him, Romans 8:29. I just gave you 4 passages right there of what Jesus is like. Now, before we go a little bit further, you're going to see how he was a busy man. He did, not only said something, but he did what he said in Acts 1 and verse 1. Yet, stop and think for just a second. Let's put it in perspective. How old did he live to be? We know the answer. 33. That ministry is 3 years. Think of all that he accomplished at 33. And yet, at his death, nothing was left undone. That's one of the other unique things about his death. And I'm afraid we don't cover that a lot of times in our lessons. I'm guilty of that as well. We'll talk about him offering himself as a sacrifice. Yes, he did. That was a perfect sacrifice. But there's more to it than that. That really he accomplished a lot in just those short years. And you're looking at the book of Mark, and you're going to see the word straightway if you have the King James or American Standard, or if you're like me using the New King James, or even some of the other translations, it's going to say immediately. He did not procrastinate and waste time. I can't say that about myself. I'm the world's worst procrastinator sometimes. I need to go look that up in the dictionary, but I'll get around to it when I go look it up in the dictionary. That makes sense. That means putting things off. He didn't put things off. So who is he? And what is he like, and what does he stand for? I believe, and by the way, I'm going to take just a verse on it. We probably won't get to chapter 16 today. So if it's all right with y'all, will we leave? I can't even talk. Where we leave off today, can we pick up next week if that's all right with y'all? Okay, we'll do that. You might have a different favorite verse or what you would call a key verse when you're studying the book. It doesn't mean my answer is right and yours is wrong or vice versa. But I'm going to take a verse on each chapter and see what he is like, and we try to apply it to ourselves. Whereas a lot of times when I did local work, full-time work, I always went verse by verse chronologically. Many places that I have to go to, and I've been blessed in the last several years of going to a bunch of places. This year I've only been in my home congregation twice because I'm always filling in somewhere. So it's been a real blessing and a real joy. So if I call you by somebody else's name, understand that I'm at various places at times. But look in Mark chapter 1. Verse 35. Who is Jesus? Here's a man of prayer. Wait a minute, I thought he was divine. He is. Wait a minute, I thought he had no sins. He didn't. But he's a man of prayer. Communication to the Father. And not only during times of grief and sad times do we go to the Father in prayer, but times of prosperity as well. Men everywhere always ought to pray, Luke 18:1. We see great prayers all through the Old Testament. When you look in Daniel 9, how Daniel is praying. We go back into Ezra 9, that prayer. We go back into John 17, prayer that Christ has prayed for all, that we ought to pray ourselves, that we pray that brethren can get along, and that unity can abound, that we can appreciate each other and not take each other for granted. The same Bible that tells us to contend earnestly for the faith in Jude 3 and stand strong for the truth also tells us that we must love our brother and sister as well. Do we pray for our brother? Or do we try to get one up on them, so to say? Here is a man of prayer. Pray to God. Certainly let us do that. Sometimes we want to bruise each other's heart and cut each other's throats rather than get calluses on our own knees by going out to the Father in prayer. Does that make sense? We get a lot of blank stares. So you got that? Sometimes we need to go down on our knees more in prayer for our brethren, for our leaders. Not just the ones that we disagree with, but even the ones we agree with. To love all of mankind. Our goal shouldn't strive to be making enemies with those on the inside and those on the outside, but our goal should be to strive to make friends through the Word of God. That should be our goal. So Mark 1:35, he's a man of prayer. Look at Mark 2 and verse 17. Here's a man of logic. Logic simply means the science of correct reasoning. It comes in handy when you're studying the Bible with somebody who can either get confused, B, somebody who doesn't know, or C, somebody who teaches error. Now I'm going to warn you, pay attention. It is not a weapon to use to try to win one over on the other person. A lot of times people try to do that. You get on a lot of social media sites, and I get so disgusted at a lot of brethren at times who try to one-up on the other brother. There are some things that are a matter of opinion, and they must be respected. But when it comes to doctrinal things, it must be confronted, but there is a correct way of confronting it. And our goal should not try to assassinate the character of somebody else. And I see that a lot of times on social media, and I've seen it a lot of times in pulpits. It gets old real quick. I get so sick to the point of nausea when I hear brethren talking at all-time low about other brethren or about problems in the church. Yes, there are some problems in the church, but our goal should be to try to help them and restore them. And you'd be surprised how many congregations at one time I've seen go off in left field have now come back and gotten things straight. And I will guarantee you, if you keep hounding brethren in an ugly, negative way, those brethren would not have come back. I will guarantee you that beyond a shadow of a doubt. We have the obligation of speaking the truth in love in Ephesians 4 and verse 15. If you remember when I said in that sermon, or maybe it was just now in the Bible class, the same Bible, it was in Bible class, the same Bible that says contend earnestly for faith also says to love your brother. 1 John 4 is just as binding as any other passage in the Bible. That is not an option. Here's a man of logic. What is he saying? It is not those that are healthy that need the doctor, but who? Those that are sick. Question: have we all stumbled and fallen short of God's glory? Romans 3, verse 23. Yes, we have. Our goal should try to get that person out of sin, not rub their face into sin more, and open pray that they continue that sin. And I've seen some brethren with ugly attitude who try to want to smear that brother's face more in sin. That is ungodly, and that's not right. I'll leave it at that. I'm not going into any discussion with it. Chapter 1, he's a man of prayer. Chapter 2, he's a man of logic. Who is Jesus? Look at Mark 3:35. Here is a man of impartiality. Acts 10:34, he shows no favoritism toward anybody. All men everywhere stand on level ground at the foot of the cross. All men everywhere stand on level ground at the foot of the cross. Who did God create in His own image? I think I heard the answer. You said man. Good job. Question: would that mean all of man? A lot of times, why do I say it? Brethren can get like this too. We expect it from the world, but I've heard some brethren at times take that attitude. They'll look down their nose at somebody else because they're not like them. For example, and I've preached in some small rural congregations and some of the older generation, and I'm not making fun of them, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying all from that generation was like that either, so don't get me wrong. I have seen some brethren get so snooty towards somebody else. Look at that person and say, well, he's a piece of trash. No, you have no right to say that whatsoever. That person was created in the image just like you are. You remember during the sermon I said I worked in juvenile corrections. I've also been in taught Bible in adult prisons. We had a problem in the youth system in Texas where if you were not just like me, so to say, the attitude people would point at themselves, they looked down at you. Didn't matter whether it was skin color or educational level. Oh, they would pick on them. And I'm like, no, you're going to learn to get along. It's called manners 101. What is Jesus saying? Who is that? Who is brethren? Those that do the will of the Father. You remember when Vacation Bible School we sung a song? Red, yellow, black, and white. They are all what? Precious in His sight. Those are not just words. Those are words that we must live by. Now we've discussed that fact from that aspect. Who is Jesus saying His brethren are? His brothers and sisters are? Those that do the will of the Father. Question: if God has set parameters of who is in His family, does mankind have a right to remove those parameters? Because there are some who say, here's a person, he is so religious, he's a brother and sister. Did that brother or sister obey the gospel? No, but that brother and sister is so moral and upright. Who is one that includes and adds to the family of God? There you go. Got an A. God does. Acts 2 verse 47. Acts 2 verse 47. He adds them. Not me. He doesn't stop and ask, somebody wants to obey the gospel, Jimmy. Does he meet your approval? He doesn't do that. But you talk to some brethren, they act that way, like he needs their approval. Who are his brethren? Those that do the will of the Father. Those that do the will of the Father. As we say in South Texas, that's pretty self-explanatory right there. Mark 1:35, the man of prayer. Mark 2:17, the man of logic. Mark 3:35. I said it at the tip of my tongue. The man of impartiality. Thank you. She listened. He's whispering the answer. The man of impartiality. See, the teacher does pay attention to the students sometimes. Sometimes being the key word. Look at Mark chapter 4. It's quiet back there. They're up to something against us grown people. I am surprised I don't hear my youngest. Mark chapter 4 and verse 40. Or rather, there's not that verse. Who is Jesus? Look at Mark. Oh, I'm in the wrong passage. No wonder. Remember earlier I said I turned 50? I didn't tell you I got Alzheimer's. 441, the man of power. Yes, I was right. The man of power. All power and authority in heaven and earth has been given unto him. Matthew 28, verse 18. Power to remove sin. The power to take away sin. Have you ever heard a man say, I wish I had the power, I just wish I had the power? Well, he's carrying God's word with him. What more power do you need? Even what obeys him? The wind and the sea. Oh, us a little faith in him at times. Our faith begins to waver. Why? Because with him all things are possible. Look at Mark 5:19. Who is Jesus? What is he like? Here's a man. He not only was divine, he had that human side. And in that human side, here's our dearest friend that we can have. You won't find a greater friend than him. Why? No greater love in John 13, verse 34, than this, because he laid down his life for us. Loved us enough to die for us. Question. Pay close attention. What about that? Relatively, it's a simple question. Who should have been on that cross? Who should have been on that cross? I should have been. You should have been. If there's ever a time in history where an innocent man has been put to death, it's right there. Right there. But the dearest friend that we could have. I remember Brother Ramsey telling us in school, telling us a story, how back in the turn of the last century in a one-room rural schoolhouse, about 12, 15 students, all boys. All the lunches were missing. Back when the teachers could punish the students. All the students' lunches were missing. And the teacher said, whoever does it, he's going to be in so much trouble, he will get a whipping in front of the whole class if I catch him. All of a sudden, here they caught one sickly little boy, real skinny, pale, eating everybody's lunch. The teacher says, you know what, I got to be true to my word. He's going to get a whipping for it. All of a sudden, two big old boys came up and said, we'll take the whipping for him. Likewise, didn't Christ do that for us? I will take the death for mankind. I will take the beating for them. I will take the humiliation for them. Did he have to? Oh, I know all prophecy should be fulfilled. I understand that aspect. But did he have to? Did he deserve to? Let's look at the tomb. What happened on the third day? He arose from the tomb. Question, if he would still be in that tomb, if that tomb was still full, man's lives would be empty. That tomb is empty, so you and I do not have to be empty. Right? Right. So we don't have to have empty lives. That's why that tomb is empty. Our dearest friend, right there. What does a friend do? He looks out the interest of somebody else, or the best interest of somebody else. He's not a fair weather friend. He's a genuine friend. Look at Mark chapter 6. In verse 50. He's walked on water. Peter wants to do the same thing. What does he say? Do not be afraid. Be of good cheer. A man of peace. You got to let me know when class is over because y'all don't have a clock.
I'm keeping time with it.
I would be scared if you put up a calendar, though. Having said that, growing up in South Texas, I got to hear a lot of the older, quote-unquote, famous preachers. Many of them have long since passed away. And there's one of them, Boy Wallace Jr., who was a common preacher back at the turn of the last century, all through the 30s and 40s. Not many people my age got to hear it. But if one thing people knew about Brother Wallace, he was long-winded. That would be the biggest understatement of all time. He could lay a peg down on the pulpit and an hour later come back to that peg. Somewhere down the line, Mom got the bright idea after services asking me what the sermon was about. Keep in mind, this congregation, about 350, my dad's an elder. Back then, the trend in a lot of the congregations, the young people sat together in the front. Mom got the bright idea, asked me what the sermon was about. I didn't know because I dozed off. Guess who had to sit with Mom and Dad for 6 weeks? It's a wonder I like the preachers or even England because of that. I was scarred for life. Then she got Alzheimer's right before she passed away, but that was the one thing that she did not forget about. Asking me if I still remembered it. Yes, I do, Mom. I will never forget that. Thanks to you. I didn't say it that way, but yeah, I didn't forget about it. Who is Jesus? Here is a man of peace. The man of peace. Do nations sometimes sign treaties what? Only to throw away the treaty or make it null and void that, you know what, we're not going to follow it. Man will say, peace, peace, and there's no peace there. Who is a true peace giver? Christ is. Where Jew and Gentile both can come as one. Come as one. Where man can come to God, reconciled to God. Why? Because before, man was away from God. Peace. True peace. True peace. Stop and think about it for just a second. Did he come to bring unity among his people? I'm going to help you out. This means yes, this means no. Did he come to bring unity among his people? Absolutely. But guess what? There is something that you have in common with the person sitting next to you and all other people. It is this. They have sinned, so have you. Sadly, we have that in common. That person sitting next to you is a person that had the courage to come here to try to get reconciled to God and make things right. We ought to be thankful for that. We ought to be thankful for that. We come together to try to be reconciled and to come as one. That should be the goal. The man of peace. Look at Mark 7, verse 37 and 38. Here is a man of majesty. What do you think of majesty? Do you think of somebody important? Somebody in a high place? Guess what? He didn't go to the cross on a prancing white stallion. On a donkey, and he had to borrow that donkey. But he's still King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Revelation 17, verse 14. Man of majesty. I'm sorry?
Verse in chapter 7.
Chapter 7, 37. I almost said on page 866, and there's a story behind that. Johnny Ramsey, when he was teaching, I might tell you several stories. He's teaching class, we're writing just left and right, trying to keep up with what he's saying. In some passage, he's saying like John 3:16, Mark 4, some blah, 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 blah. And it says page 866, and I'm writing page 866 in my notes. He would do that on purpose and kind of get tickled and get a laugh out of us. In fact, if you look at my Facebook page, it's me and a bunch of other preachers in the Corsicana area. And you can imagine that night we're telling all stories, Johnny Ramsey stories. Look at Mark chapter 8, verse 36 and 37. Who is Jesus? Here's a man of proper values. The man of proper values. What, go Matthew 16, verse 26. What would it profit a man if he gains the whole world, and yet he's going to lose his own soul? What's the motto today? More is good. We want to keep up with the Joneses. What they have, I have to have. We think we're entitled to these things. And spiritually speaking, you'll meet a lot of people who think they're entitled to God's benefits, and we're not entitled to them. We don't deserve them. But it goes a little bit like this. If my dad was still alive, he'd be 90 years old. Keep in perspective, a 90-year-old now is somebody who grew up in the Great Depression, and they didn't have a chance to be a kid. They went straight from being the kid in the Great Depression where they had to do man's work to where World War II came, they had to go right into war. So they didn't have a chance to be a kid. My dad grew up in some tough situations and tough circumstances out on a farm. It wasn't only that economically, but the Dust Bowl, his parents were farmers. They farmed peaches in Parker County, Weatherford, Mineral Wells. And then they lost one boy at birth. It was tough on them. We had more in one room. And by the way, we didn't have a mansion. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 9 kids. 5 boys in one room, 4 girls in the other room. And there was none of this. If you couldn't sleep, you slept with mom and dad. They made you sleep back in your own bed. Only I had a sleeping bag with my little brother. Tried doing that all growing up. Kept me humble. I'm not complaining. I thought all people were like us growing up. I didn't know any better. But my dad grew up we had more than one room than they had in a whole house. Nowadays, it seems like people want more and covet more than what they've ever had. And they're not happy. Howard Hughes, incidentally, who was raised in the Lord's church, thought more was good. Solomon would say all these things are vain. They're vanity in Ecclesiastes 3. Some trust in horses, some trust in chariots, but we call upon the name of the Lord forever. Psalm 20, verse 7 and 8. Keep things in perspective. The proper values. Proper values. Some want to try to gain the, 0 minutes now? Okay. Can I finish my 2 sentences? The proper values they had. That's who he was. Next week, we'll pick up in chapter 9.